Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at a mid-shadow build. This one in particular, of course, is using the pretty standard formula of a super good early game, pretty solid mid-game as far as it all goes, and then finishing right on the cusp of the late game. So 7, 8, 9 is typically where your late game kind of starts, and that's where things kind of start going crazy for this kind of deck. So of course incorporating anything like Aeneas 9 drop, the Colossal Skull Omen of Craving, Mecha Wing as a defensive card, or just using it aggressive in the early game works quite well. Soul Steel becoming quite a decent card for removing those pesky 4 health followers or even 3 health followers as quite decent value. We are running a single Aisha. It is mainly as a extra kind of push when you need it. Really good when you can, of course, pull it from the deck, which is always great. Kawi, because it can of course both respawn the Aisha or respawn things like Bone Drone, which I actually find are really handy. Getting either Bone Drone or Deadly Dreamer or Lady Grey, those 3 cards tend to be the best targets, other than of course Aisha herself, but it's okay. Otherwise he's just a straight up 3 damage Storm, which is also a really good follower. Especially since for a 3 damage Storm he'll only cost 6 if you want to use Revos in other places. So overall, still really solid, using of course the Machina archetype to really finish it off. The Machina archetype, which does well for most of the mid-range variants for decks, and we're going to have a few of those coming up now that the meta has shifted. So we're going to get right into this and check it out. So our first opponent here is actually going to be against Forest. That shouldn't be too big a deal. Forest is actually not a bad matchup to get. This deck does have a huge problem with dealing with other Machina followers. It's a really pain in the ass against something like Sword. It also doesn't do too great against Elena, since of course its removal options are very limited. Unless you can get lucky with a super good early game, you will definitely struggle as soon as you hit that mid game, where Elena just starts flooding the board. But overall the deck is still reasonably solid, but in my opinion there are definitely some better ones to play. I mean, the Machina archetype is very solid and there are a lot of decks taking good advantage of it now. Rune has some okay variations, and even other decks like especially Sword have some crazy things they can do with the deck. Carbuncle might be an Evo Forest, judging by of course that. And those come down, that's typically what I think they are. Carbuncle was a very, not so much underrated card, but just not a good legendary back when it did first launch, as it didn't have enough support for any kind of archetype for it to function on a decent level. It was just kind of an extra support card at that point. Now though, it's definitely come into its own and become a very strong addition to a lot of those, not aggro forest decks, but those definitely Evo focused ones. So we can go for the Underworld. This is where something like Bone Drone is actually a really great pull here. Since Bone Drone is effectively 2 followers, and trying to keep the board flooded so that we can of course get decent turn 7 plays going later on. But it looks like they are going to clean up as much as they want for this turn, which is not great at all for that. So they got a triple wipe there. We do now need to take it out with whatever we could, but maybe just going face is actually the best option. We get 5 damage, put him to 7. We get to keep another Bone Drone on board. Definitely a decent value in those Bone Drones. Apostle and a Carbuncle though, that's definitely not a good sign. When they do manage to get those Carbuncle Sparks into their hand, they can definitely be a tricky thing to deal with. Pulling Evos basically out of nowhere. But at least our Colossal Skull is going to do some serious work for this matchup. His removal powers are just amazing. But another healing, not great again to come up against. At least this time they will have to trade if they don't want to take 8 damage to the face, which would in our case be lethal. So here's the Aisha. So the best couple of cards to use with Aisha, of course, are stuff like Deep Dream and Manifest Malice. Getting those 1-drop ghosts that you can just send to face immediately is usually really good. So like from here, as you see, you go from basically no board to a reasonable one. I believe I do misplay up ahead a little bit for the next turn. Oh, maybe not here. No, it was here. Alright. So ideally, I could have just ended the game by going into the Kawi and the Deep Dreamer. Either the Kawi for 3 damage and go Deep Dreamer for 1. That would have just instantly ended the game. Unfortunately, I threw the Serb just out of a complete reflex of just throwing a Serb onto the board, without actually paying attention to the fact that I could have literally just ended the game. Not that it made a huge difference, since of course Serb itself allows me to open up 2 damage, and it basically just gave them 1 more chance to potentially make a comeback. But now it's going to be over no matter what. Alright, next up we're going up against a Runecraft player. Runecraft, in particular Dirt Burn Rune, is another deck that this deck actually does pretty well against. As I mentioned, it really does suck against things like Elena and Mechasword, so some of the top level decks at the moment are a little bit of a struggle. Because the Elena nerf definitely gave people more of a counterplay to Elena, but it definitely didn't really make a super large impact. It was just a small enough one, I think, to balance it out. It was actually a pretty reasonable nerf overall, compared to how at least they handled Bloodcraft, which definitely felt way too heavy-handed. They could have done it a little subtler and balanced it out more, so it was still viable but not dominating, so that people would have more of a counter back. But too late now, things have been changed, and you just gotta move on and adapt. So Bone Drone, a great turn 4 play, especially on an empty board. So we do want to be able to remove this here, and Cerberus is actually a really good play. So if I did this in a pretty okay way, I probably could have handled it slightly better and actually got 3 damage to face instead, but it was still alright, and we got to keep our entire board. So I can't complain too much about that one. Ugh, Delta Cannon, not what you want to see. Now we do need to deal with this. Now I did decide just to go for some light trading, get rid of it that way. Set ourselves up pretty nicely actually for turn 7, where we can just go for Omen, which would be a huge swing turn. And even if they don't, we do still get like 11, 12 damage out of this without much issue. So Eleanor, Blended, they're going to do some insane removal here by the looks of it, but not going to be anywhere near enough. Oh, Zealot of Truth, that was a half decent pull. They did leave up 3 drones there, so... Well, sorry, droids. They're droids, aren't they? Anyway, we're going to be able to go for a total of 11 damage, leaving them with just 2 health. And when we've got the ambush right now, we are in a really good spot to win this game. Especially since the odds of them ending the game was basically 0 for that turn. They would have needed some pretty insane pulls. Truth Adjudication though, really good, although they did only pull 1 health off it, which is probably the worst outcome for them, especially since Soul Steal now will just end the game. If 1 Soul Steal was enough, 2 of them probably would have been anyway, so not too bad, worked out quite nicely. So while definitely not being a current tier 1 deck, Mid Shadow is still holding its own, even in the current meta, which is pretty half decent. So definitely an okay deck. Would I recommend it if you're looking to ladder and just climb and get points? Probably not, but if you've got a challenge or something to do, this isn't a half bad variant to try out and give a go. Hades Shadow I still feel like is a little too inconsistent. I've had a lot of trouble getting it to run properly, but Mid Shadow, yeah, feels pretty much like Mid Shadow. It's just not suited for the current meta as far as things go. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button and subscribe. You'll find this deck list in the description below. Until next time, guys, see ya.